In the late 13th century, a small band of Turkish warriors settled on the edge of a dying empire. Their leader was a frontier chieftain named Osman. Later Ottoman tradition described him as the son of Ertuğrul, a respected frontier lord. But the details of Ertuğrul's life are difficult to separate from later legend. What we do know is that Osman emerged as the leader of a small principality on the Byzantine frontier. His territory was tiny, a border outpost in Anatolia, wedged against the shrinking frontier of Byzantium. Around him, the old order was collapsing. The Seljuk Sultanate, that once ruled much of the region, had fractured into rival statelets. Byzantium, once master of the eastern Mediterranean, could barely hold its remaining territory. Osman saw opportunity in the chaos. Around 1299, tradition places the foundation of the Ottoman state. He built no enormous palace. He commanded no army of 100,000. What he had was momentum, and a reputation for raiding aggressively enough to attract followers, but wisely enough to keep them loyal. By his death in 1326, his son Orhan had captured the city of Bursa. It became the first major Ottoman capital, and the dynasty took its name from Osman himself, the House of Osman. In Turkish, Osmanli, the root of the word Ottoman. No one in Constantinople was watching closely enough. That would prove to be a fatal mistake. In 1354, an earthquake struck the Gallipoli Peninsula. It damaged the walls of a fortress on the European side of the Dardanelles. Ottoman forces did not wait for an invitation. They crossed the strait and occupied the ruins. For the first time, a Turkish power held permanent ground in Europe. It would never fully let go again. Orhan's son, Murad I, pushed the advance further. Adrianople fell. Sofia fell. Ottoman forces marched deep into the Balkans, absorbing Serbian and Bulgarian territory piece by piece. Murad took the title of Sultan. He was no longer simply a frontier chieftain. He was the ruler of an expanding empire. It was also during the early Ottoman period that the Janissaries emerged. They would eventually become one of the empire's most feared institutions. The corps developed into an elite infantry force directly loyal to the Sultan. Later, the Ottoman state expanded the system known as the Devshirme. Christian boys from certain conquered Balkan territories were taken into imperial service. They were converted to Islam, trained, educated, and prepared for careers as soldiers and administrators. For centuries, the system supplied the Ottoman state with some of its most disciplined servants. In 1389, Murad met a coalition of Balkan armies at Kosovo. The battle was brutal. Murad himself was killed in his camp, reportedly by an assassin who had approached the Ottoman forces as a defector. But his army won. The Balkans lay increasingly open to Ottoman expansion. Within decades, Ottoman territory stretched from the Danube to the Aegean. A single generation had built an empire on two continents. Murad's son, Bayezid, earned the nickname Thunderbolt for the speed of his campaigns. He besieged Constantinople itself. The last Byzantine emperor was pushed toward near total isolation. It looked as though the Ottomans might finish what Osman had started. Then, from the east, came Timur. Timur was a conqueror in the mold of Genghis Khan. His army was enormous. In 1402, near Ankara, his forces met Bayezid's. The Ottoman army was shattered. Bayezid himself was captured. An almost unthinkable humiliation for a sultan who had terrified much of Europe. According to later legend, Timur paraded him in a cage. Historians debate the details of that story, but the defeat itself was real. Bayezid died in captivity within months. What followed was chaos. Bayezid's sons tore the empire apart in a civil war that lasted more than a decade. Historians call this period the Ottoman Interregnum. Rival brothers ruled fragments of the same collapsing state. And for a moment, it seemed the entire Ottoman project might disintegrate as quickly as it had risen. It did not. In 1413, one son, Mehmed I, emerged victorious. He reunified the realm. The empire had come within a single battle of extinction. It would not come that close again. Mehmed I spent his reign stabilizing what remained. His son, Murad II, resumed the expansion his grandfather had begun. In 1444, a coalition of European powers launched a crusade to push the Ottomans out of the Balkans. Hungarian, Polish, and Wallachian forces marched toward the Ottoman frontier under King Władysław of Poland. Murad had briefly abdicated the throne to his teenage son. But when the crusade broke the peace treaty, he was forced back into command. He met the coalition near the Black Sea town of Varna. The crusade ended in disaster. Władysław was killed on the battlefield. His body was never recovered. The Hungarian commander János Hunyadi barely escaped. Ottoman authority in the Balkans was no longer in serious question. By the time Murad died in 1451, the empire was larger, richer, and more organized than it had ever been. One prize, however, still eluded it: Constantinople itself. The Byzantine emperors had held that walled capital for more than 1,000 years, and no army had managed to take it by force. Murad's son had other plans. Mehmed II inherited the throne at just 19 years old, and he was obsessed with one goal: Constantinople. He built a massive fortress on the European shore of the Bosphorus. Its purpose was simple: cut off the city's supply lines. He also commissioned cannons of a size rarely seen before. Some were capable of firing stone balls weighing more than 600 pounds. One of the engineers involved was a Hungarian named Orbán. He had first offered his services to the Byzantines. They could not afford him. Mehmed could, and he put his weapons to work. When the Byzantines blocked the Golden Horn with a massive chain, Mehmed found another way in. He ordered Ottoman ships hauled overland on greased wooden logs. They were dragged around the barrier, then launched into the Golden Horn. The siege began in April 1453. For nearly 2 months, the ancient walls held. The defenders were outnumbered by more than 10 to 1. Then, on May 29th, Ottoman forces broke through. The last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI, is said to have died fighting near the walls. His body was never conclusively identified. The Roman Empire of the East, after more than 1,000 years, had ceased to exist. Mehmed entered the city and made Constantinople his imperial capital. He converted the great cathedral of Hagia Sophia into a mosque. He resettled the depopulated city with families from across his empire, and he rebuilt its markets, institutions, and defenses. Constantinople would become the political and cultural center of the Ottoman Empire. Over the centuries, the city would increasingly become known as Istanbul. Mehmed was just 21 years old. History would remember him by a new title: Mehmed the Conqueror. The century that followed was the empire's golden age, and no ruler defined it more than Suleiman. He took the throne in 1520. He opened his reign with conquest. Belgrade fell in 1521. A year later, Suleiman captured the island fortress of Rhodes from the Knights Hospitaller after a siege of nearly 6 months. Under Suleiman, Ottoman territory reached one of the greatest heights in its history. The empire stretched from Hungary to the Persian Gulf, from North Africa to the Caucasus. Its navy dominated much of the Mediterranean, and in 1529, Ottoman armies advanced all the way to the gates of Vienna. The siege ultimately failed, but the fact that Ottoman armies had reached Vienna sent a shockwave through European courts. Yet Suleiman's legacy was not built on conquest alone. Europeans called him the Magnificent. His own people called him Kanuni, the lawgiver. He developed and organized a legal system designed to govern an empire of extraordinary diversity. Muslims, Christians, Jews, Turks, Arabs, Greeks, Slavs, all lived under the authority of the Ottoman state. His court became a center of art, architecture, and culture. The chief architect Sinan built some of the empire's most enduring monuments. Among them was the Süleymaniye Mosque. It still dominates Istanbul's skyline today. And within the palace itself, another figure rose to extraordinary power: Hürrem Sultan. Born far from the Ottoman court, she eventually became Suleiman's legal wife, and one of the most influential women in Ottoman history. She shaped court politics for decades. Under Suleiman, Istanbul became one of the most magnificent cities in the world. What began with a single frontier chieftain around 1299 had become, by the 16th century, one of the most powerful states on earth. an empire connecting Europe, Asia, and Africa. It would survive for centuries after Suleiman's death. A single episode cannot capture 600 years of Ottoman history in full. We've moved quickly through an empire that shaped the modern Middle East, the Balkans, and North Africa. It left its mark on architecture, law, trade, religion, and geopolitics. Its long decline would come much later. The empire would eventually collapse after the First World War, but that is another story. For now, remember where it began, a small frontier state on the edge of a dying empire, and remember where it went, from Osman to Constantinople, to an empire that lasted more than 6 centuries. That was the Ottoman Empire in 10 minutes. What part of this story would you want to see explored further? We'd genuinely love to know. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.